my number 10 of 2020 is actually something I talked about last week in our top 5 directors, and that is Andrew Patterson's The Vast of Night.
Wow.
That's something on Amazon Prime original, and it to me it's just the perfect display of creativity and direction when it comes to having a minimalist budget and still making like a grand feeling like sci-fi film that's still like a loving homage to like the 1950s. Actually set in the 1950s itself. It follows a switchboard operator and a radio DJ as they try to like uncover the sounds that are coming through the frequencies. And they just got so creative with the use of sound, the use of technology, the use of cam work to like build this suspense and build this mystery, while at the same time like adding like a new breath and life to like the sci-fi genre like as well. So it was just really really dope. I really really appreciate it, The Vast of Night, and I know it's probably going to be on your list, Andres. I'm probably going to save more conversation about it for later, but I really dug it. My number 9 is actually something that I was a little bit lukewarm on when I saw it initially, but we actually, upon further reflection, and even after we did our review for it, I'm actually came to enjoy it more. And that's actually David Fincher's Mank. This is my number 9 film because initially like going into, I guess my expectations was a bit different than what the actual product ended up being. I guess I expected something a little more suspenseful, or maybe something a little more, I don't know, like dramatically like enticing or something like that. I'm not saying that Mank wasn't, but it was just different than what I expected. I didn't know it was going to be about like, I didn't know it was going to be about like the struggle for like writing the movie with also like this backdrop of like this socialist like versus Republican politics of the 1930s. I didn't know that was going to be a backdrop of it, so it was just different. But I ended up, after we saw it at the drive-in. The drive-in also didn't make it the best experience for me either, because I felt like like when you're just it's hard to just lock in at the drive-in, especially when it's a movie that is in black and white. It's already kind of dark. And the sound is already kind of distorted, and then on top of the car distortion is like you're just kind of tuning out. But that's the benefit of it being on Netflix. I get to rewatch it scene by scene, like take my time with it, and actually break down a lot of parts that I end up liking about it. And I like the real life political allegory that I was going for with like the 2020 like kind of parallel that I was going for a little bit. I also like its representation of Hollywood and how it kind of unearths like a lot of the underlying beliefs of like a lot of these studios and stuff like that. So there's a lot of really really good stuff, and I also just really enjoy Fincher's like direction, even in subtle times. Like even in there's times where like there's a blackout, like a fade to black, but you can actually notice that all the lights in the scene are fading out like individually. So it's not even like a transition. It's actually lighting is fading out. So those little David Fincher touches that you could tell from here places to place. The fact that it was filmed in black and white too. I don't know. There's a lot of good technical stuff I could get behind it with. So I really enjoy Mink.
Yeah, to me, that one still is definitely like lukewarm. I still think it's interesting. I'm still fascinated by it, but I feel like it falls in the lower tier of Fincher, which is why it's not something that I've like revisited since the drive-in and then one more rewatch at home. But that's definitely somewhere like in the honorable mentions. It is still a standout of this year.
It's definitely in my honorable mentions as well. Unfortunately, not on my list. Mank says so much, man. It talks about kind of the facade of Hollywood and where it started. I love that because obviously of what Hollywood is now, or what the perception of Hollywood is now. I'll never forget that interview with John Boyega that came out a couple months ago where he said, I don't know why everyone keeps saying the left Hollywood. Well, like top executive Hollywood is all right wingers and like all super right and like super not against, not for anything that anyone is fighting for. And I love that he said that because that's true. And that's kind of where Hollywood started from. And you see that in this film when it talks about like, Hollywood was all about like the Republican Party and all that stuff. So I don't necessarily see where people see that anymore and they're trying to cover it up. And it also talks about the Hollywood system that is rooted in greed and rooted in power, repeating power and giving more power to powerful people. And it's just an endless cycle of that. I really enjoyed that. And I love that it was made by Netflix, which is like the Hollywood killer right now, literally making their own studio and making their own films in different locations and going away from the Hollywood tradition of releasing it in theaters. It's perfect. It really is a perfect encapsulation of what film was to what film is now. So love it, man.
My number 8 is actually, this is going to be my second black and white movie back to back. But actually want to shout out a really interesting documentary that I think is absolutely worth checking out. Is from director Garrett Bradley, and it's called Time. And what this documentary is essentially it follows Fox Rich, and she is fighting. She's an advocate to get her. She's advocating to get her husband, whose name is Rob. Coincidentally, who's serving a 60-year prison sentence. So like by the time we actually meet Fox Rich, she's been fighting this fight for like 20 plus years, and like all of, she had 2 kids with her husband, and now they're like fully grown adults, and like really never even had any like interaction with their father. And it's a really like powerful documentary. It's co-produced by the New York Times. And it's just heartbreaking because this is something that affects a lot of families like all across the United States. And it's sad because it's like, and even, she admits to it, like this was a mistake that her and her husband had made 20 plus years ago, but now they're still facing the consequences of it, even though like there's so many other like issues going on across the country. And then and it's really also heartbreaking too when you actually like watch this documentary and you follow this woman, and she's like the sweetest woman in the entire world. Like she's talking to all the court people super nice, like, hey, when is the appeal coming? Hey, when's the appeal coming? And then like at the end, like, and she's doing all this nice stuff, and they're still like dragging her along. They're still like saying, oh, one more day, another day, another day. And like at the end, it's like she just kind of gets frustrated, and you're just like, I feel you, like you just feel it. And I don't know, it's so personal, and it's so deep. And I implore people to check it out. It's on Amazon Prime right now if you haven't watched it. And I'd really highly recommend it. It's definitely one of my favorites of the year. My number 7 is something that is, I believe, getting a good amount of recognition, but I think is getting recognition in the wrong places. Most notably from the Golden Globes being nominated or getting consideration in the best foreign language category, and that's Minari. To me, this is absolutely. For one, it's 100% an American film. It's all about the American experience of living in this country. Like that's kind of the ideals that America was built on. Like somebody, cannot be from here, can be from like Ireland or, Mexico, or in this case, Korea, and build their life here in America, and build an establishment here, like in a family here and a legacy here. And that's something I really dig. Like I think it's, this is from director Lee Isaac Chung, and it's telling like the very personal story of him and his family's like movement to Arkansas, and going from living in a tiny house, like barely getting by, to having this big sprouting land, but still trying to figure out what to do with all of that, and still trying to adapt to this experience. And it stars Stephen Young as the father, Jacob, and the young kid who plays David is Alan S. Kim, and he is such a sweetheart. Like he is a sweetheart throughout this entire movie. It's just an overall feel good film. I feel like this is like the perfect movie to watch with like family, with especially if you have a family who's like struggled when y'all are younger, and y'all managed to overcome the adversity and still are staying together and still being wholesome with each other. Like this is something that I feel like could touch a lot of people. And I think this is absolutely one of the most, one of the most emotional and personal films I've seen this year. So my number 6 is actually staying on the wave of Amazon Prime, and that is One Night in Miami. One Night in Miami is the new film directed by Regina King, and starring, featuring a lot of all-time great people, like or fictionalized versions of all-time great people like Malcolm X, Muhammad Ali, Jim Brown, and Sam Cooke. And yeah, this was for one, I just feel like the performances all around, it was just like a performance piece, that was just like wall to wall, great acting. The dude who played Malcolm X, Kingsley Benadir, was absolutely electric. Aldous Hodge was great too, and Leslie Odom Jr. Sam Cooke was breathtaking as well. And yeah, just all around, it was a really fun movie. I felt like, like I said in the review, it was really well paced. Like I never felt boring like once during the entire thing. It felt like, even though it was based on a play, it never felt like too stagnant. Like it felt like it was still moving. There's still like a dynamic going on. There's still a rhythm. I just think it just is dope seeing Regina King, after having so many great years being as an actress, her being able to channel her talents on camera and be able to take that behind the camera. And she's been able to do it on TV, but now in the feature film debut, she really killed it. So
It's crazy to think how incredible she was in Watchmen, right, man? Like, God, she killed it in Watchmen, in front of the
yeah.
camera and now and behind the camera. I'll talk about One Night in Miami, much higher on my list later on.
Yeah, this one's on my honorable mentions. I really, really enjoyed this one. Like I said, guys, I started out with a list of about 40 films that I genuinely really, really enjoyed. So this one's high up there for everything that RB3 just said.
My number 5, well, um, since we're on the John David Washington train, we talked about a lot of I've talked about a lot of black cinema so far on my list. I talked about Time, talked about One Night in Miami. We're definitely going to talk about Soul and more small acts later. But I can't deny the pinnacle of black cinema in 2020, and that is from director Christopher Nolan, and that is Tenet.
The blackest director in Hollywood.
Yeah. The new Spike Lee, as I call him, Christopher Nolan. Yeah.
With Robert Pattinson, the best sidekick black character in all of Hollywood.
Oh yeah, he's like the Martin Lawrence to John David Washington's Will Smith. That's what he is.
That's exactly it, dude.
Yeah,
That's spot on.
Nah,
I love it.
Shout out to Tenet though. I really enjoyed this movie. Again, this was another one just like Mink. I was really mixed on when coming out of it. Like I enjoyed the spectacle of it, but I didn't really know what was going on. Like I was a little lost in the sauce. But before we did our episode on the meaning of Tenet, I did get a chance to rent it and I rewatched it a bunch. And yeah, there's a lot that I could just really love about it. Like I love movies that make me think, and I love movies that make me really try and dive in and really try and figure out something that like I couldn't explain or figure out on my own. So I really dig that. I also really I do think I didn't think it had a lot of character or a lot of personality like when I first watched it, but I think after just watching it more, I kind of like found some nuggets and pockets of creativity in there throughout. And one moment that I forgot to mention during our podcast that I thought was really good that I had noted but I didn't say was there's a moment in there where John David Washington and Robert Pattinson are trying to break out of the airport terminal because like the gas is coming out, the gas to suffocate them is coming out, and then John David Washington is trying to pick the lock to break in, and that's actually, and as he's picking the lock, he breaks the lock, and that's the exact same like a robber trying to get out of a spot and breaking the lock like as he's trying to pick the lock is exactly what happened in Christopher Nolan's first film, The Following. And that's exactly what happened to that character. So it was a nice little like full loop around. I don't know. I just find that really appealing. And there's just a little nuggets and pieces as like a film nerd and as a Nolan nerd that I could just really get behind and Tenet. So yeah, I really dig it. And I know a lot of people don't like it. And I could totally, those criticisms are more than valid. But I really enjoyed Tenet myself personally.
I love how you said lost in the sauce. It's because it's all sauce, bro. It's so saucy, man.
Yeah.
Where's the chip at, bro?
You got dick for the chip.
Sometimes if the sauce is good, if
That's
the sauce
true.
is adequate,
Just
I'm
like
okay
dump
with
it on there, bro.
Yeah,
Just dump the
I'm
sauce.
pretty okay with
Yep.
it. And that's kind of my thoughts about Tenet. It was really fun to see this big spectacle film, even though I did watch it at home. It was nice. It felt refreshing. It felt like I was back in the cinema a little bit for a second. And yeah, I enjoyed it. I had a lot of fun with it, like I mentioned before. So I like that you gave the shout out to little independent filmmaker Christopher Nolan on your list.
Black filmmaker legend Christopher Nolan.
Yeah. Little tiny indie movie Tenet here that is shouting out here highlighting. Yeah, my number 4 is something that again shouted out last week, and I'm super grateful that I got to check this out before I checked out this list. This is another documentary that I wanted to include, and that's Boy State. And Boy State is something that, for one, again, I had no idea of what this whole thing was. I didn't know I have any idea of what this was going to be about. Like, it was just it just seemed like a really weird thing. But then we actually watched the documentary about it and actually know what's behind it. You're just like, oh, this is actually kind of weirder than I thought. But at the same time, it's like infinitely fascinating. You could kind of see like how, real politicians could end up spawning from something like this, because it is so much like about like, the like inspiring people to elect you, even at the age of like 17. And it's so, and again, I really, really want to check out Girl State, and salute to actually Meg, who's a great supporter of First Cut. She actually wrote in a lengthy message on Twitter to me after she watched our top 5 directors of 2020. And she was telling me about how there's actually a boy, she actually knew a lot of people from her high school that was in like the Boy State and Girl State, like kind of thing. Like, she kind of said like, she said a lot of boys and girls, it was a big part of like her high school experience. And that in Tennessee, almost every one of her friend group, every single person in her friend group either went to like Boy State or Girl State, but didn't really talk about it. And, they said it was like some sort of secret. But like, obviously that secret kind of got like unearthed in this documentary too. So I don't know. It's just really, really cool. It's dope. It's just a really, really super, super amazing concept. And I really look forward to seeing some of these young leaders at some point down the line. Like I'm rooting for Steven. I'm rooting for who was the other kid? The black kid. I forget his name. Now the black kid in there who was really, really amazing. And apparently also another commenter alerted us. We're talking about Eddie, like the far right guy who was running on the other side of this, quote, election in the Boy State. Apparently he actually came out as bisexual and is a leftist. So good for Eddie too. Good for Eddie too.
Wasn't Eddie the guy who won the governor?
Yeah.
Wow,
Eddie was the guy who won the governor. Yeah, apparently he's a bisexual lefty now. And
it's the problem with kids, man. The problem is, I mean, obviously there's the documentary spells it out. It really does. It shows you like they keep the tradition of like whatever your parents say, that's what you got to do. Yeah. And that's what the documentary shows. Great documentary for sure.
My number 3 is actually something that you just mentioned, Sabrina, and that is Nomadland. And this is it's funny because we're talking about Minari, and that being from an Asian American filmmaker, telling the story of being American. And I feel like that's what No Man's Land is too, just from a different perspective. It's all about the American experience, just from not necessarily from a racial perspective, from a different racial standpoint, but just from a different lifestyle standpoint. Like, the whole idea of us like living in houses and living in like under one roof and staying stagnant in one place is something that is kind of inbred into us. But for some people, they just can't live that way. So I think it's really, really dope that this film like represents that. They really do a good job of highlighting like all different like kinds of different people that are inside of this nomad community. I know there are some points they're talking about perhaps having, demonstrating like the nomad communities of like color, and like black people and, because there are different communities and pockets. But I think it's fascinating that they chose to, focus it on somebody like a Frances McDormand, an American white woman, because it, makes it so much, it removes like the kind of like, it removes the kind of like stigmatization to it. Like, it makes it all about just, the person, the character, like the heart of the film and the heart of the country, so it's really, really dope. And I also think, as much as I talked about how much I love Tenet and how many questions that movie raised, I feel like I feel like No Man's Land raised like a lot of almost the same amount of questions, but the different kinds of questions. Like, how did they film this? Like, is this real? Is this documentary? Like, how did they get Amazon? Like, there was parts where she's working at an Amazon factory. Like, did they get Amazon's approval for that, or did they just say it was a documentary, or what they do? Like, and there's just so many mind-bending, like, meta realism questions that I kind of like start to have about this movie, and I think that is equally engrossing as well. So, also the score. I'm sorry, I don't have the composer's name like pulled off the top of my head, but the score is amazing. And also the fact that she edits this film herself, like she writes, directs, and edits it and produces it and edits it as well. It just is, you could feel like it's a very personal, touching film. And the composer is, oh my goodness, I cannot pronounce this. Ludovico. I'm not even gonna try, man. But amazing score. Amazing score.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I definitely second all of that. This is one of those really special films. I think Minari and Nomadland, us talking about it over the last few choices, really great ones.
Yeah, Ludovico Unadi. There you go. My
There you
Italian.
go. My number two is something that you both have already mentioned before, but I do want to highlight both this as an individual movie and as a collective series, and that is, for one, the movie I want to highlight is Mangrove. Mangrove is absolutely something that was mind-blowing to me when I first saw it on Amazon Prime. I'm not gonna lie, the second I saw it, I texted y'all like immediately, and I was like, we have to do like this small acts thing, like this is so cool. So we did a review for it, and yeah, we covered all the small acts films, and honestly, props to Steve McQueen and like the whole team behind like Amazon Prime and the co-screenwriters that he had like involved with these projects, because they're really telling really important stories that really add to the conversation in very meaningful ways. Obviously, with Mangrove in particular, it's with the trial of the Mangrove Nine and how they were, it kind of lumped together all these random people who were protesting just to protect a restaurant that was being harassed by the police. And I think for me, like, I think part of what makes me love this movie so much is that it's, for one, is reserved. Like, it's not like overly like over the top. It's not like gruesome or grotesque. Like, I think it's, it could have been easy, especially for somebody like Steve McQueen who has done something a little more gruesome, like 12 Years a Slave. It could have been really easy for a movie like this to fall into like tragedy porn or like super violence or anything like that. But I feel like every single step of the way they handled things with maturity, and it also didn't feel as stagey as something like the trial of the Chicago 7, which I really enjoyed that movie too. Like, and I'm not gonna lie, I did text y'all too. Like, after I watched that one, I was like, we should review this one too. But then, people did. If I'm being real, some people's reactions and reviews to it did kill it for me. Like somebody, with the whole like Sorkinisms thing, how they were taking lines from like other Sorkin movies and how it was just in the trial. I was like, oh, that's kind of lazy. I don't like that. And then just after thinking about this whole, this whole like, unity, it just kills me. I hate myself even more and more the more I think about that movie. But Mangrove, I'm just ashamed. I'm not ashamed. I'm proud that I was able to find this and we've been able to talk about it and highlight it, because I do genuinely think it's one of the better movies of the year. My number one is actually something y'all both mentioned way earlier in the list. And this is coming from, me, so I'm probably a little biased when it comes to this movie. But this is I'm biased because, for one, I'm black, and that's just dope too. But number two, this is a Pixar movie that was really like moving and heartfelt. I just love Pixar all around. So this is like kind of like the secret sauce like formula that was made for me, and that's Soul, right? And Soul is to me like pretty much like, I wouldn't necessarily say it's like pitch perfect, but it pretty much hits like out of the ballpark when it comes to like what it's trying to do, right? And I think there are a lot of criticisms like towards the movie, and again, I think those criticisms are totally valid, but I think the critics of those said things are looking for something that the movie's like not trying to be. And I think Soul is trying not to be like a black movie. I think Soul is trying to be a movie that is about black culture, and I think it's a movie that embodies black culture in a really positive way. Unlike, I think, sometimes people are like, oh, like where was like the tragedy or the emotional grief, like with Coco was dealing with death, or with, Up is dealing with like losing a grandmother. There wasn't really a lot of that like kind of deep emotion. I mean, I guess there was with the whole idea of him dying, like literally, but it wasn't like some sort of like big emotional thing. And I think that's why people had a hard time wrapping their minds about it. It's much more existential. It's much more like bigger than like one individual emotion. It's about the act of living and the act of life in general. So also there's also detractors who are upset about the representation of Tina Fey's character being like a white girl too. But for me personally, like, again, I said this a little bit before already, but it's not necessarily a black, it's not trying to be like overly black or the stereotypes of what we consider a black movie. Like, we learned a lot of the themes of this movie through black interactions, like what we see in like barbershops, or through jazz music, honoring jazz music, which is an iconic culture that deals with the like spontaneity and the randomness of life and just moving forward. And there's just so many deep concepts in this, even to the point where even when I initially reviewed it, even like I thought, like, when I initially reviewed it and I saw it like 3 times at that point, like I had a perspective on it and what I felt like the overall meaning of, like, loving the job that you have or whatever. I thought that was the correct reading of it. But even weeks later, I revisited and I'm thinking maybe that's not even the right way to look at this movie at all either. Like, maybe it's not even about work. It's not even about how you work or if work is even valuable in the human experience at all. It's just about livelihood. So it's really, really dope. There's so much there. And like Pixar, there's a great quote by Andrew Stanton where he did a TED Talk where he talks about like the process behind Pixar. And a lot of times they prioritize, not necessarily, a lot of times in movies, they'll give you the whole idea of a movie. It should be like 2 + 2 = 4, right? And a lot of times the movies will give you the 4, but they don't give you the 2 + 2. But Pixar does a really, really good job of giving you that 2 + 2, and doesn't necessarily give you the 4, but allows you to figure that part out by yourself. And I really, really dig that about Soul. So
Yeah, yeah. Obviously, Sabrina and I both love Soul, and it was on my list, and it's a great, great film. I love that it's your number one RB3. That's perfect because you're right. It is like perfectly made. Like, you love Pixar, man. Like, you read Pixar books and stuff, right?
yeah, I had a whole Pixar class in college.
Yeah, yeah. That's incredible.